Take a look at the room you're in right now. 4 walls, a ceiling, light, maybe a bed, maybe a chair, and somewhere, in your bag or in a cabinet, a small box. Inside it, pills, painkillers, antibiotics, fever reducers. You don't even think about them. They're just there. You take one when you need it. But that box has only existed for the last 200 years of human history. In the hundreds of thousands of years before that, when you got sick, what did you have? The answer is far more complex than you'd expect, and in some parts, far more intelligent. Think about this. You wake up and your left side is burning. You have a fever. Breathing is getting harder. In the modern world, this is a concern. Within a few hours, you could be sitting in a doctor's office. But 10,000 years ago, waking up with those same symptoms, your options were almost nothing. No doctor, no pharmacy, no sterile needle, no antibiotics. All you had were the plants growing around you, a few people sitting by a fire, and someone who knew what worked, and that someone could probably save you. Archaeological excavations make one thing very clear. Before humans invented writing, before they built cities, before they even discovered farming, they were treating each other. Bones found at Boutiez-Boulancourt in France date to around 4,900 BCE, and those bones carry an unmistakable mark. Someone's arm was amputated with stone tools, without anesthesia, without sterile conditions. But that's not the surprising part. Around the bone, there's healing tissue. That person survived. They lived for weeks, maybe months after the operation. This wasn't an accident. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. So who knew? If you try to answer that question through modern categories, you'll never get it right. Because in the ancient world, doctor and priest were the same person. Therapist and sorcerer were the same person. Surgeon and poet were sometimes the same person. They called him a shaman, or a medicine man, or a healer priest. The shaman wasn't just an herbalist. He was the community's observer, the one who knew what dulled pain, what broke a fever, what closed a wound. But he also had to explain why sickness came in the first place. And in that era, that question always had the same answer: an invisible force. It could be an evil spirit, angry ancestor, a broken balance. So treatment wasn't just handing over medicine. There was ritual, prayer, drumming, trance. And this wasn't as absurd as it sounds, because scientists have known something for decades. The mind's role in the healing process is real and measurable. We call it the placebo effect. But think about it this way. The placebo effect isn't just imagination. It triggers real biochemical processes. It releases pain-reducing hormones. It activates the immune system. It lowers blood pressure. The shaman's ritual, the community's support, the power of belief in recovery. And these created genuine physiological effects. But the real power was in the plants. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets survived from 3000 BCE. On them, garlic, licorice root, poppy. How much to use, how to prepare it, when to give it, depending on the illness. In ancient Egypt, aloe vera was applied to wounds. In South America, cinchona bark was used against malaria. Willow bark for pain. Stop willow bark. The active compound in the aspirin you take today comes from willow bark. Morphine comes from the poppy. More than 25% of the active ingredients in medicines used worldwide are still plant-based, which means the man writing on those clay tablets was writing the prescription for the pill you took this morning, without knowing it, without a laboratory, only by watching. But when you think about how that knowledge was actually learned, everything shifts. Trial and error. Someone ate a plant and recovered. Someone ate one and died. It took years, generations to understand which was which, and everything they learned, they didn't write down. They spoke it. They whispered it to someone before they died. That whisper traveled from mouth to mouth for thousands of years. Eventually, it entered a laboratory and got pressed into a white pill. But the darkest part of this story hasn't come yet. Skulls were found in France dating to 5000 BCE, and on those skulls, there are holes carved with stone tools. Brain surgery. This is called trepanation, and on most of those skulls, there are signs of healing, meaning the patient survived the operation. A 2023 study published in the journal Archaeological and Anthropological Sciences examined a skull from the Yanghai Cemetery in China's Xinjiang region, dating to around 750 BCE. The skull showed evidence of both trepanation and a bone flap. Procedure. The individual had survived at least 8 weeks after the operation. The researchers concluded the surgery was most likely performed by a shaman healer with stone tools, without sterilization, without anesthesia, and the patient lived. This wasn't chance. This was the product of thousands of years of anatomical observation. But now comes the real twist, and this part unsettles most people. Hippocrates, the father of medicine. He lived in the 5th century BCE, and he did something genuinely revolutionary for the history of medicine. He was the first to define illness not as divine punishment, but as a natural process. He built a system based on observation. He recorded findings. He tracked symptoms one by one. He's called the father of modern medicine, but most of his theories were completely wrong. The 4 humors theory: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, fragile. When the balance between them broke down, illness followed. And to restore that balance, what did they do? They took blood, they cut a vein, and let the patient bleed. This was practiced for centuries. George Washington was among those who died not from his illness, but from the treatment meant to cure him. By modern estimates, bloodletting killed far more people throughout history than it ever saved. So the man called the father of medicine was also one of the founders of one of the most harmful medical traditions in history, and no one realized it for centuries. But now go back thousands of years before Hippocrates, something else already existed in Greece, the Asclepion, a temple dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine. When you arrived, you bathed first, then you entered the temple courtyard, stone columns, pine trees, the distant sound of water. A priest met you. You didn't speak, you simply walked. You spent the night there, on a stone floor, side by side with other patients, in the dark, in silence. In the morning, you told your dream. The priest listened. Then he told you the treatment, sometimes a diet, sometimes exercise, sometimes an herbal mixture. These temples weren't built at random. Every one of them was constructed beside a clean water source at high elevation, in cool and fresh air. The patient who entered rested. They ate, they talked, they were not left alone. The brain cleared itself of stress hormones. Thousands of years later, medicine gave this a name: holistic treatment. The man who came believing in a dream found, without realizing it, exactly what he needed: rest, clean air, people, hope, and most of the time, he healed. So with all of this, with such limited means, did they actually survive? Some did, but think about this. Before the 1840s, every surgery was performed on a fully conscious person. There was no general anesthesia. The faster the surgeon cut, the better. The person strapped to the operating table screamed and tried to hold on. The best surgeons boasted about their speed, finishing in minutes, because the longer it lasted, the deeper the shock went. Before 1928, a thorn in your finger could kill you. There were no antibiotics. A small wound would turn to infection. The infection would reach the blood, and blood poisoning would begin. There was no cure. You waited and watched, and childbirth was its own story entirely. For thousands of years, every birth was a gamble. Both mother and child put their lives on the table. Before cesarean sections became routine, bringing a child into the world was one of the most lethal acts in human existence. These three things we now consider ordinary: aspirin, anesthesia, antibiotics, don't even account for 1% of human history. In everything before them, people made do with what they had: plants, ritual, each other's hands. Many survived, many didn't. And now, let me tell you something. That box in the medicine cabinet, the aspirin inside it, the aspirin whose active compound comes from willow bark, the one that was first noted by a shaman healer thousands of years ago, carried from generation to generation, eventually isolated in a laboratory and pressed into a pill. That box isn't 200 years old. It's tens of thousands of years old. Every generation that came before you felt the same pain, searched for something in the forest, called someone, performed a ritual, prayed to a god. Sometimes they healed, sometimes they didn't, but one thing never changed. Someone was always there to hold a hand, to know what worked, and to pass that knowledge on to the next person before the time ran out. Modern medicine was built on top of that knowledge, and the first link in the chain that put that box in your cabinet was someone whose name was never recorded, whose story was never written down, searching for a plant in a forest.